G'day, AJ Mahara here. And in this video, I'm going to answer a question from Quora.com. So, for those of you watching this on my YouTube channel, that's where the question comes from. And if you're on Quora, that'll be obvious. And then I would invite you, if you're seeing this on Quora.com or elsewhere on the internet, to please check out and subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/AJ Mahari. So, why do people with borderline personality disorder have such trouble remembering conversations accurately? And I think this question might go to when there's more high conflict, high emotion, when the relational dynamics get more complex, to put it mildly, and or are somewhat abusive and or traumatic to those around somebody with borderline personality disorder. So why do people with BPD have such trouble remembering conversations accurately, especially in high conflict or high emotions, or when they're triggered, when they have triggered emotional dysregulation and there's conflict, or you don't know why they're acting the way they're acting, and they may not even realize what they're doing because it's so subconsciously driven? Well, the biggest reason is because a person with borderline personality disorder, first and foremost, will experience something that other people are not responsible for, but they feel like it comes from you. But it's in them already from their original abandonment trauma, attachment trauma, core wound that arrests emotional development by the age of 2. But it becomes immediate. And so part of the reason why they have trouble remembering conversations accurately, especially around conflict and intense emotions when they've been triggered to emotional dysregulation, is because it becomes a dissociative experience for them. That they are in the room with you in the here and now, physically, maybe even intellectually to a point, but when they're triggered to these emotional dysregulated feelings, it becomes this dissociative episode of a repetition compulsion. So something that's happening again and often again and again and again in cyclical ways, that is really a reenactment of something from the past. So you, in the conversations in these, it gets thrown into the here and now in a way that doesn't make sense to anybody else in the here and now. And the person with BPD doesn't even often realize is happening in the here and now because they're dissociated. Their emotions, when they're triggered and emotionally dysregulated, they can't really think effectively because, or consistently, across whatever they've said, you said, whatever happened, because when they're in these high intense emotions, that floods the rational, the thinking parts of the brain, which is true for anyone really if you're in that intense emotion, but especially for people with BPD who encounter these repetition compulsions and triggered dissociative episodes and splitting that goes all hand in hand with intense dysregulated emotions that then flood the brain in a sense that floods the capacity of the structures in the brain that are responsible for thinking, and it's just all feelings. And so that gets a little bit distorted for people with BPD often. So they will still intellectually kind of be there in this, well, they're dissociative emotionally or regressing in age emotionally. And so the point is they can remember some things about the situation or what they said or you said, but for a lot of people it's not very clear, as it's clear to you what happened or what they said, but you don't know that you were rendered invisible, and then a lot of for people with BPD, and they're not usually consciously aware of this at all. And then what loved ones or people close to someone with BPD encountering this, especially after, when you're like, why don't they remember this or they said that? Why are they saying I did this? And everything seems all mixed up, distorted. Um, and a lot of people think that's just because they're trying not to take personal responsibility. That can be part of it at some point, but they don't really ever catch up to exactly all that happened when it was of a dissociative nature. And what you need to know as a person close to somebody with BPD or has been, even if you've been abused or traumatized by this, which happens to people, and people with BPD don't do it intentionally, but it happens, and there's no excuse for abuse or traumatizing another. Um, then what you need to understand clearly too is that it's not you that's being spoken to. It's you're now, you've taken on the split, they split, and the split, you are now the split part, object other, bad parent representation. So that's another, key factor in all this. You're going to remember what was said, but you have to remember, why does it make no sense to you in the here and now, or not a lot, or it's very confusing? Because they're really not talking to you here in the here and now, okay? But you're there, and you're the one that gets the brunt of it. So the other thing that happens, and why people with borderline personality disorder have such trouble remembering conversations in these situations, um, or episodes, shall we say, like, complex relational dynamics that are breaking down in terms of where high conflict is suddenly thrust within the relational dynamic, whether it's on two sides or coming from the person with BPD, or they're reacting to something they misinterpreted or distorted that you said that you didn't mean, or things of that nature. Um, it's thinking and remembering things really accurately after all that can get mixed up for people with BPD and distorted for the reasons I said. And these intense, so with the aspects of high conflict and intense emotions, or intense emotions that then trigger the person with BPD and they split, and then maybe they're actually generating the conflict, but they don't know that, and now it's a conflictual situation, or relational dynamic. It distorts the memory because of regression to past experiences to varying degrees for people with BPD, because not everybody with BPD is the same. So people with BPD don't usually outright forget, but they do misinterpret in ways that, once they cycle through emotional dysregulation and come back to their baseline, they may not recall the logical order of what happened, or what was said to you by them, or what you said back. And with the misinterpretations and the layered layers of the past, and you being the bad parental object, a lot can get lost, and they don't have awareness or that known self to call upon to like figure out, wait a minute, okay, so like I just got mad at you because it's really about my mother, and it happened because this and this and this. Until, unless they get enough therapy, they're not going to catch any of that, and it's very subconscious. But there's no excuse for what ends up being abuse to others. And so the other thing I wanted to say, why they don't often remember, or seemingly just, misconstrue and don't have the same understanding that you do, in a relatively logical way that you do, but you might be missing this other part about how they're really not raging or yelling or creating a conflict directly with you, although you're there and it starts with you, but then they're triggered and you're now this bad parent, object other parent representation. So it's from the past and it comes into the now, and the person with BPD doesn't really have awareness of that unless until they've had a lot of therapy, and then this would stop happening. And the other thing is, so for the non-personality disorder person close to the person with BPD or in that situation, you need to sort of like realize or learn how to realize and slow down that they're actually not even talking to you, because otherwise like that's why it seems so senseless in the here and now, because it is a repetition compulsion and a regression, and it's about the past in the borderline's life. So projection and protection and defense mechanisms against vulnerability and or personal responsibility, as well as all I've already explained, um, kick in this natural deflecting way that impedes accurate factual overall understanding on the part of people with BPD in these types of situations. Um, and so they're not in the here and now then, and then when they come back to the here and now, when they're emotional dysregulated, triggered emotional dysregulated, dissociative episode of a repetition compulsion kind of ends, and they come back to baseline, however long that takes for each person with BPD. Then after that, lots of people with BPD are not that consciously self-aware, through the lack of known self, that coming up again, what just happened, and they may feel humiliated, embarrassed, shame, all kinds of old feelings that go with the regress to dissociated episode of like where they really went when you think they're in the here and now aiming at you, but they're really talking to you as if you are the bad object, split bad object, other wounding parent. So, that's really kind of why that people with BPD will have such trouble remembering these types of conversations or these conflictual, high emotionally intense situations that like may come out of the blue to you. And the person with BPD is triggered, emotionally dysregulated, dissociation, all of those things that they may not be aware of at all. But it becomes a situation that gets triggered where it's going to be flight, fight, freeze. And in these situations with many people with BPD, not all, but I think what this question is really driving at is, what's happening here? Why does this happen? It's usually when a person with borderline personality disorder goes into fight, and it's fight. So it's flight from the here and now in a way, emotional intensity, dissociation, and like I said, also age regression emotionally. But it's fighting back at that time that's thrust into the here and now due to splitting and the triggered emotional intensity of the repetition compulsion. So I hope that wasn't too circular. And if you're watching this video, this answer on core.com or elsewhere on the internet, please check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/AJ Mahari, because I'm going to be putting up a video very shortly also that explains in more detail what is a repetition compulsion in borderline personality disorder. And so if you're a subscriber on my YouTube channel seeing it there, then watch for that coming soon. And if you're not, you might want to head over for that explanation and a plethora of many other videos I have on borderline personality disorder for those with BPD, for those who are loved ones or ex-loved ones, and talk about narcissistic abuse and all kinds of other things on my YouTube channel. Anyway, so that's my I hope fairly quick, but not quick enough really. Answer to the question: why do people with borderline personality disorder have such trouble remembering conversations accurately? I'm not sure if that was a general question, but the way I interpreted the question and what led to my answer was, I'm taking it that this may mean, after there's been conflict, after a lot of intense, you don't know what just happened there maybe, but, after you got raged at, or after the person withdrew, or just after some kind of conflict, and relational dynamic that doesn't make sense to people who don't have borderline personality disorder. So I hope that was helpful.